Welcome to the Perpetual Growth Podcast with Zach Palmer, the show where we explore the strategies, insights, and stories that empower you to grow your business, strengthen your relationships, and elevate your health. Because growth isn't just about what you achieve, it's about who you become along the way. Now today, I am thrilled to welcome Thomas Cox. Thomas transformed himself despite struggling with Asperger's and really allowed himself to become a much more empathetic and effective leader. And he looks for paths to show anyone how they can walk through this transformation, despite some of the things that they may be battling.
Thomas, I would love to dive further into your story and share with our listeners a little bit about who you are and some of the things that some of the challenges that you overcome that have brought you to where you are today in your journey. So if you would, first, just tell us a little bit more about you, who you are, what you do, your professional journey, and your why, your driving force, your purpose.
Yeah. Thank you, Zach, very much for having me on. It's funny the way you said I allowed myself to become more empathic, and nothing could be further from the truth. I had to engage in what's called self-directed deliberate neuroplasticity, which is where you set out to put yourself under the right level of stress to cause neuroplastic change to occur. And you do it with some sort of a goal in mind. And my goal was to become more empathic. Now you might, well, why would I need to do that, you ask? Well, turns out in my late 40s, maybe 50s, I discovered that I have Asperger's syndrome, which is a mild form of autism. They don't use that phrase anymore, Asperger's, but it's the one I grew up with. And what that translates into is, kind of the brilliant jerk, only I wasn't all that brilliant. And so you try to imagine a kid growing up with no intuitive sense whatsoever of what other people are thinking or feeling, and barely much of a grasp of what he himself is feeling and how isolating that might be. Well, in fact, I can tell you firsthand it was. I didn't realize that being profoundly alone wasn't what everyone was going through. And then when I hit I want to say 40 or so is when it became very clear to me that I needed to grow and change in ways that up to that point I thought wasn't possible. I just thought I was wired the way I was wired, and I am who I am, and that's just the way it is.
Such as many.
Yeah, and at some point, I guess I've always had a bit of a growth mindset. I've always thought that there are ways I can grow. There's things I can do to develop skills and develop abilities. And I knew I wanted to have better, deeper human relationships. I'd spent the first 15 years of my career doing database architecture, and I was a business analyst. It's very left brain, very technical. If I had slightly different background, I'd have been a lawyer rather than an engineer. But that kind of very, logical, symbolic manipulation in your head and on paper and in computers, that was my thing. I was good at it. I was respected for it. I got paid well to do that. And, the kind of really exacting, annoying, persnickety, like, well, no, I really need to know the details here. It actually paid off in a better system when I was really extremely drilling into the details on what it was meant by some business need. And at some point, I guess it was around 2002, I'd plateaued. I'd done all the technical stuff I felt like I wanted to do. The databases weren't challenging anymore. It's like once you've designed every database system there is, they tend to loop back on themselves and look very similar. And I needed a new challenge. And I thought, I've been working with other, software engineers all this time. And the one thing none of us are very good at is people. And there's nothing sadder than a bunch of engineers sitting around a table trying to solve a people problem, because none of us are equipped to do that. I thought, what if I just focused on that? Maybe I could figure that out. It seems interesting, could be intriguing. I might have use for it. You never know. And I'd gotten an undergraduate degree in psychology, which was all the analysis of, but not the living of those ideas. And that started my journey. And that was 2002. And by 2005, I had become a toxic boss. And that smacked me in the face. And I thought, well, no, but that's not what I wanted. And that was very disconcerting and upsetting. And I considered for a while, maybe I should just go back to databases and do what I know I'm good at, because clearly I'm struggling over here. And then I thought, no, hang on a second. I am reasonably bright. I know I'm very motivated. And if a bright, motivated person can spend 3 years studying leadership and team dynamics and end up in this completely the wrong place like I just did, I don't think it's me, or it's not just me. I think the leadership literature isn't very good. And when I suddenly realized that what I'd been reading and studying was about 90% garbage, I suddenly thought, oh, okay, now I know what I'm doing wrong. I need to be a much more skeptical consumer of this material. And as soon as I made that shift, I began to notice the between 1% and 10% of the material out there that actually was useful guide, applicable, that wasn't decontextualized, wasn't overgeneralized, and actually helped me do what I wanted to do, which was to connect with people and lead them and challenge them and help them grow. And as you can tell, I had to do a lot of growing of myself to make that happen. I'll tell you the one thing that probably accelerated me more than anything else. It helped that I'd done Toastmasters for many years, and so I felt comfortable speaking in small groups, in medium-sized groups. But what I didn't have was a practice where I would engage in emotional recognition of others and emotional expression of myself in real time with rapid iterations and very low stakes, because that's how you learn best, is fast iterations, fast feedback, low stakes, safe sandbox. And I took a class on improvisational theater, not comedy. Comedy is distancing. Theater, which is all the emotion. And when I took that, threw myself into it, I discovered that I could catch other people's feelings and I could recognize them when I was really, really focused on it. And with repetition, it got a lot easier very quickly. And I discovered that the empathy circuitry of the brain, like every other part of the brain, is highly neuroplastic if you know what you're doing and set out to grow it, which I had. And that took me leaps and bounds further than I had ever been before. And I then took a number of the warm-up exercises from the improvisational theater universe and incorporated that into my leadership curriculum in the areas when we're teaching and learning empathy and practicing it and making it stronger in ourselves. And that's just one of about 8 or 10 things that I did to create a leadership curriculum that could take even me, with all my deficits and all my lack of intuitive ability and lack of initial empathy, it could have taken me in my 20s, and within a year or two, I could be as good a leader as it's taken me 20 years to become it now. So that's kind of the rambly story of how I got to where I am, teaching leadership to others.
Oh, thank you for sharing. I mean, that's
and learning the hard way. I mean, I've got to be the world's most unlikely student of this. And so if I can learn it, I promise you can.
and that's beautiful. I mean, I love your story and your message. There's a couple things you said that really stuck out to me. I mean, one, that the initial diagnosis, which I've always had a problem with Western medicine diagnoses, just because oftentimes particularly when it comes to psychological diagnoses, because it gives some people something to live up to in many instances. Now they can deflect and just say, that is who I am. I was born that way. It's a disease. It's a dysfunctional component in my brain. But you had a heightened level of awareness of voice and intuition, something that drove you to say, there's something I can do about this. I'm a smart guy. So I appreciate that. I am also astounded by the fact that, this wasn't until your 40s where you had this moment of awakening, and that you had the discipline and wherewithal to take a step back and, not only pursue the education, which is fantastic. And as you know, I was smiling when you were discussing that particular component, because you're reminding me of aspects of my leadership journey. I dive into countless different leadership practices and protocols, and I've read countless books and been through tons of different programs. And the simple reality is, what I did initially was started projecting all of my shortcomings onto the
Right.
people I was attempting to lead.
Of
I
course.
was phenomenally good at identifying all of their problems, but leadership starts at the top, and it starts really ultimately with leading ourselves first. If we
Yes.
can't, if we don't adopt the mentality and start to apply those tools and systems and strategies and tactics to our own personal being, there's no way that ultimately we're going to be able to have the depth and breadth, the transcendent impact that I believe real servant leaders do want to have today.
Yeah.
And I know that was probably, at least for me, one of the pivotal points of awareness after, series after series of circumstances where I would do some things well and other things really poorly. But really realizing that until I start to apply these tools and
Yep.
principles to myself first and
Yes.
recondition and rewire the brain and my way of being,
Yeah.
it was going to be that perpetual hamster wheel where you understand the concept intellectually, but until you've really literally rewired the nervous system,
Yeah.
you're going to be chasing your tail. So at such a, I mean, it's still by most standards a very young stage in life, but to have that type of awareness, to have that diagnosis at that stage, did you find, was there any part of it for you that was unsettling, unnerving, almost scary, or was it almost like, wow, this is shining light on something that has been a conscious or unconscious challenge all throughout my life, and I finally have the opportunity to figure out what I can do to make life even better? I mean, what was the
Yeah.
emotional journey that you went on through that
Well,
experience?
I've never been formally diagnosed. You don't get a lot of opportunities to do that when you're an adult. It's many
Yeah.
thousands of dollars, and here I am. I'm kind of set in my ways in some ways,
Yeah.
and it can be hard to diagnose. And I thought, well, is it a useful diagnosis? Does it help me see existing th facts in new ways? Does it unlock new ideas and ways of being? Does it open up courses of action? Or is it just a convenient label to justify sitting still? And I didn't want a convenient label to justify non-action. So
Yeah.
what I liked about my best guess that it's probably some sort of mild Asperger's is it explained a lot of the symptoms of my youth and the struggles of my young adulthood in a way that helped me think, oh, the deficit for me is almost certainly in intuitively understanding others and their emotions. Oh, I never look at people's faces. Ah, what if I did that?
Mm.
There's a wonderful book that I studied deeply called The Language of Emotions by Carla McLaren, McLaren. Absolutely brilliant book. And that elevated my practice enormously. And of course, I get these human interactions, and every time I now talk to people, I can look at their faces and look at their eyes and listen to their tone of voice. And I've learned to ask questions like, I'm wondering, you seem a little excited right now because your eyes are big and you're smiling, and I'm picking up some excitement maybe. And I would make guesses about their emotional state while mentioning the things that I'm actually seeing, very specific physical signs, and usually in a kind of a curious way. And I found that I would get good feedback from that. People would tell me and it turns out people actually like it when you notice their emotions respectfully. And that was turned out to be a pretty good and useful practice, because when people are upset, especially, they want to fight over the remote or the laundry or the report that's late. And if you pause the talking about the facts and the data and the tasks and the objects, say, well, hang on just a second. I think I'm picking up on da 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 da, like you seem upset or you seem excited, whatever it is. And if we switch the focus to that, often naming the emotion, Brene Brown teaches this. If you name the emotion, you gain control of the emotion. And now you have the emotion instead of the emotion having you,
Mhm.
which puts you back in the driver's seat. And if the other person is upset, excited, whatever, you have now helped them regain their composure. And you've also shown respect for their feelings. And that has been a useful move in the repertoire that I teach.
I find that fascinating, and I've read the same philosophies and practical applications among many contexts, and applied the similar strategies myself. And I don't like to even utilize the word strategy because it's not something that I'm tactically trying to do and depersonalize interpersonal
Right.
communication. It's
Yeah.
just an effort to categorize the conversation. But
Yeah.
what I think is really interesting about it is so often we are unaware of our emotional states throughout the day and how dramatic of an influence they have in our ability to perform, to succeed, to have positive interactions and open communication. And that lack of awareness and intentional or unintentional attempt to almost bury those emotions,
Mhm.
one, the body never forgets, and two, the body also never lies. So to your
Mm.
point, it's like, I don't remember the exact statistics, but it's only a small percentage of human interaction of language that is actually spoken. The vast majority is in our body language and tonality, not necessarily the
Yeah.
words that we are using.
Yeah.
And to me, the opportunity that we all have to be able to just take a moment to recognize that what we are feeling and almost release that emotion, and as you
Mm.
say, relinquish the control and now gain power back just by simple awareness, is a really,
Yeah.
really powerful and profound tool. Um,
Yeah.
I'm really curious, for our listeners, and particularly business owners,
Hmm.
partners, C-level executive, anybody in a leadership role of any kind. I think we all can have a certain level of awareness around our natural tendencies, for better or for worse. And oftentimes people aren't sure what to do next. Now, I know for me, it's one thing to do the work myself. It's another thing to do it with the power of a friend, a confidant, a coach, or a combination of, even better. And because that work, there's nothing like somebody being able to hold up that metaphorical mirror in your face and
Yeah.
call you on those things in real time to
Hmm.
help expedite that neuroplasticity and that rewiring of our conscious and unconscious tendencies and help us bring awareness. As I was alluding to in the beginning, most leaders, I think, have some level of awareness that certain aspects of their communication modalities may or may not be, and most likely aren't serving them at the highest level.
Hmm.
What might be some of the language that the conversations that you hear that you either had with yourself or that other leaders may resonate with that might help them gain that initial point of, oh, wait, maybe this is me too. Maybe I have not been leading to my fullest potential in a way that really guides my team,
Yeah.
creates a safe environment where people feel like they have the opportunity to speak up and challenge present
Hmm.
ideas and paradigms, as well as contribute to the greater mission. Because I know we all have these unconscious conversations of things that we regret saying in the moment, that we lie awake at night thinking about, what if I had said this instead? Are there any patterns that you've noticed in those conversations that might help somebody have
Yeah.
like that aha moment where they go, maybe this is something I could look into or should look into now and pursue it?
I'll give you a couple that come to mind as I was listening to you ask that question. What popped in for me? A very good coach of mine once said, "The advice you want to give others is almost always the advice you should be taking for yourself." And she pointed that
Mhm.
out two or three times when I was like particularly wanting to say how somebody else should do something differently. And it's
Mhm.
like, to what extent should I be doing that? It's like, no, 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 it's about that. And after the second repetition, I had to, well, okay, I'll stop and look. Hang on a second. And my golly, yeah, it was, in fact, at least as much for me as it was for them. And then so if you take that on and say, okay, every time I feel like I want to give advice to somebody else, let me pause and make sure that it's not also for me, or maybe instead it's for me. So that'd be the first nugget for you. And we can walk through some examples. Second, if you find yourself annoyed at someone at work, they're not doing their job, they're not doing the job the way you would have done it, they're falling below standards, whatever it is. It almost always traces back directly or indirectly to something you have done as their leader or failed to do. To give you an example, I worked with a guy who was the owner of a large company, and his people weren't going out and selling to all of the different storefronts where they could have had their product. And what he didn't do is just patiently, calmly ask their supervisors, so, what's the calling plan? Show me the map. Show me the list of places you're going to go. Instead, he criticized and blamed the people under him, who then criticized and blamed the people under them, who criticized and blamed the people under them, and it just went down an unbroken chain of criticism and blame. I was unable to successfully coach him out of that, but I got to see it close firsthand. And at one point, he tried to shift, and for a few months, it was all different in that company. And then he reverted. But there was a window there when he started thinking, I think I haven't given you what you need for you to give me what I need. And if you aren't sure if you have that insight yet, if you're the leader, you can ask your followers, hey, what do you feel what's one thing, I would say that, what's one thing that I could give you more of or give you less of or do differently for you or around you that would help you perform in the way that I'm asking of you, but I'm not getting from you? Like, what is it you feel you're missing from me? You ask for one thing. Because if you ask, like, what do you need? They'll give you a laundry list. And now you're being set up for failure, because if they tell you 20 things, now they expect you to do 20 things. And there's no way you're going to accomplish 20 things. I made
And the
this
ego gets beat up quite a bit too.
right. And I made this mistake the first time I tried this was with a girlfriend many years ago. So, is there something I can do to be a better boyfriend? And she instantly, off the top of her head, rattled off a list. And I'm not a good audio processor. I read and write much better than I listen and talk.
Mhm.
And so after the third thing, it all just went in one ear out the other. Because I had asked and she answered, now her expectations had just been elevated. I thought, oh no, this is not good. And it wasn't, as it turns out. So I've since then learned to ask, what's one thing that if I did it differently, it would help you do your things differently? Let me make sure I'm supporting you in the way you want to be supported. Now, you don't then slavishly do whatever they ask, but you get curious about whatever point they're bringing up. And just to illustrate this further, let's say you have this is a classic story from root cause analysis. You've got a server crashes and you say, well, why the server crash? Well, the new developer uploaded buggy software. Okay, well, that's the proximate cause. It's the most immediate. And why did he upload buggy code? Well, he didn't test it properly. And you peel it back enough onion layers and you get to, well, he wasn't trained on how to do testing. We don't have testing as a culture. His boss doesn't believe in training developers. And if you want to go some layers back, like, why am I, the boss, not aware of that and not intervening? And so my abandonment of my people, or my lack of oversight, or my lack of properly setting the culture would then clearly be the ultimate cause. And so if you ever read Smarter, Faster, Better, great book. Smarter, Faster, Better by Duhigg is a collection of the things that he's found that are always true, that will always help the people who practice them. There aren't very many in the list. And he illustrates one of his points with the story of Mr. Toyota, the nephew of the founder of Toyota Motor. He's in the NUMMI plant in Oakland, California, which had taken the same workforce that had produced the worst results of any General Motors plant in North America. The worst workforce at the worst plant. Toyota took it over, retrained the same people, and cranked out better quality than any other GM plant in North America. And during the initial training, they taught them all the and-on cord, pull the cord, stop the line, don't let defects go by. Mr. Toyota came down and saw a guy struggling to put in a taillight. And he looked at the guy's name tag and said, Bob, pull the cord. And of course, behind Mr. Toyota is like this bevy of like his direct reports and their direct reports and a couple of translators, and this whole entourage has just shown up, and Bob is freaking out. He says, I got it. And Mr. Toyota says, no, Bob, pull the cord. And he grabs Bob's hand in his hand and he guides Bob's hand up to grab the cord. He didn't pull it for him. He helps him pull it. But Bob's the one who actually puts his hand on the cord, pulls the cord, the line stops, he steps out of the way, Bob finishes doing the installation, pulls the cord a second time, the line starts up, and Bob turns ready to get yelled at, because that's what he's. Instead, Mr. Toyota is bowing to him and saying, in Japanese, which is then translated, Bob, I am so sorry that I have let you down. I have not properly explained to my subordinates the importance of teaching you and your fellow coworkers to pull the cord. You are the most important person in this plant. Only you can design excellence into every product. I promise you, I will not let you down like this again. Bob is like, okay. Meanwhile, Mr. Toyota's subordinates are like, okay, I think we just got spoken to indirectly through Bob. By lunchtime, this story has gone from one end of the plant to the other, and people start pulling the cord because Mr. Toya said, this is my fault that you're not doing the thing I wanted you to do. I have not done a proper job on my end of supporting you to do the thing. Because if I had, you'd be doing it. So I'm so sorry. I will do better. What a great example of taking responsibility and focusing on what needs to be different. And I love it. I tear up a little bit every time I tell the story, because it is such a powerful example of, if you want people to take responsibility yourself. If you want people to own quality, okay, you first. And everybody is much more interested in, what do they say? No one really hears what you say, but they always see what you do. And so the power of example is perhaps one of the most underutilized and most powerful things any of us do as leaders. And again, this is an example of rhetorically saying, this is my fault. I am so sorry. And I promise you, he went back to his desk and he made some changes. He didn't just say it and leave it alone.
It's a very profound example to me on two different levels. I mean, one, it's it may sound trite, but it's nonetheless true. It's a great example of extreme ownership. And taking a moment to recognize that it all starts with me. It's one thing to establish our mission and vision and write out company values on paper and code of ethics and how
almost useless. Almost
exactly
useless.
Unless we're actually consistently living those things, which starts with demonstration from leadership. And what was really beautiful about that interaction, one huge takeaway I got was the word that was coming to me as he guided his hand up to the
and on
line,
cord. Yeah
was permission. He gave him permission to make a mistake,
Mm-hmm.
because everything that he was doing was ultimately, or not doing, in Pause and Line was being guided by fear of repercussions, fear of slowing the company down, fear of
Fear of
making a
getting
mistake,
yelled
fear of
at.
being called
Yeah.
out, fear of being yelled at. Exactly. And it was all those fears. So by using that one opportunity to say, we're establishing a new way
Mm-hmm.
of leading this organization by giving somebody the opportunity to fail and make it okay,
Mm-hmm.
and then rectify whatever mistake they made. I'm sure that had and as you stated, it had a massively transcendent impact on the organization.
Yeah.
And what more beautiful of a gift are we given as leaders?
Mm-hmm.
Because you can either be the person that keeps the employees awake at night, and not in a good way, not in a way where they're inspired and
Yeah.
motivated, but they're
Yeah.
stressed, they're fearful of coming to work tomorrow, they've got anxiety bottled up in their chest and back and neck, and experiencing health issues and calling out because they don't want to be there. Or we have the opportunity to create a culture, or reestablish a new
Mm-hmm.
culture that creates an environment that people want to be a part of, that people are willing to fight for.
Right.
And, a lot of the principles, they're so simple, but unless we have that willingness to take a step back and look in the mirror first, like you mentioned, it's not going to stick. And then
So
they have to be
let me,
consistently
yeah,
conditioned.
yeah, right. Consider a typical employer, hopefully not too typical.
Yeah.
Bob's not pulling the andon cord when Bob is supposed to. And Bob's been trained on this. It must be Bob's fault, right?
Hmm.
Ta-da! We've done root cause analysis. Bob didn't pull the cord when Bob was supposed to because he was scared. Well, he shouldn't be scared. What's wrong with Bob? You need to talk to him. Okay. Fear-driven, blaming the worker rather than the system. I promise you, your systems drive your result. I mean, Deming was
Hmm.
absolutely correct. Your systems create 95% of your outcome. Individual
Hmm.
variation is almost non-existent when it comes to the systemic output business systems, which means if Bob is scared to pull the andon cord, the cause is probably in the training, in the example, in the environment, in the system that he's embedded in his history working in this plant, because they were all former
Right.
GM people. And of course, the old GM way was never stop the line, never stop the line. If there's a defect, put a chalk mark on it and we'll fix it at the end. Terrible practice. And so if you find yourself blaming your workers for their performance, stop and say, okay, they are almost certainly doing what they're doing as a result of whatever systems they are embedded in, intentional or not, documented or not. And you might think, but we don't have fear in the organization, you think, because I, the boss, am not afraid. That's the worst test in the world. That ain't it. You're the one person that doesn't have somebody else walking around the place with that sign on their forehead saying, I can fire you, right? You've got that sign to everybody else. So, of course, you're not scared. They are. Instead, assume that when you talk to somebody and there's a power differential, they're probably going to overly defer to you. They'll laugh at your jokes, even if they aren't funny. If you have an opinion, that becomes their opinion too really quickly, and you discount that at your peril. So what do you do instead? One suggestion is, and I got this from John Bernard, who's a friend and mentor to me, is you never solve a routine problem. Never solve a routine problem, and preferably never answer a question. You can ask Socratic questions,
Mhm.
and you can walk people up. David Marquet has a brilliant book called Turn the Ship Around. He had the worst submarine in the U.S. Pacific Fleet when he took it over, and he'd been studying a different class of vessel and was completely unprepared to lead this submarine and its people. But the admiral dropped him in at the last minute, and it was chaos. By the end of the first year of his command, it was the best submarine in the Pacific by a significant margin. And he did it because early on he's like, I don't understand this ship well enough. Issue any commands at all safely. I'm not giving any more commands. And if you guys don't start showing some initiative, we're gonna keep going west and crash into Japan or something. And so he had this radical need to decentralize and delegate, and he did it in such a way that it really unlocked the potential of his people. And that included, in his case, never give an order.
Mhm.
Ask open-ended questions, not closed-ended questions. And I've learned a lot from Marquet. His book is one of probably the top 5 or 10 books that I use.
It reminds me of a conversation that you and I were having a couple days ago. I mentioned, I think one of my favorite leadership reads from this last year was the book Multipliers, which was written by Stephen R. Covey, and the second author's name is escaping me. But as you were talking through this story,
Liz Wiseman.
Liz Wiseman, yes, thank you.
Yeah, she worked at
The
Oracle around
immediate
the same
thing,
time I did.
the immediate message that started coming to mind is, if you don't know what to do, what is the most effective strategy you can utilize? Leverage the intelligence of the people around you. And so often, sometimes it's cultural conditioning, it's history, it's parentage, it's any combination of things. We model what we've seen and what we know, but what we know in most cases won't get us to the places that we want to go. And if we aren't willing to take a step back and actually effectively empower the people that are in the positions that are ultimately driving the ship forward, then you're either not going to make the progress at the rate that you could and the impact that you have the opportunity to, or worst of all, you're going to end up closing your doors and lose your business altogether. So the concept of being a multiplier really resonates with me in that same respect, because the only way he could ultimately accomplish that is by having absolute trust and faith within the people on that ship to be able to take full ownership over their positions and execute on the tasks as they've been trained to do it. And what he did in parallel was, to your point, ask the right questions. Help people to generate their own solutions instead of telling them what to do. How can I make them an even better leader, a better decision maker? And the only way to do that is through the path of curiosity. And curiosity is a tremendous superpower. So
Yes,
that stuck out to me greatly. Now, as we wrap up today's episode, and this was phenomenal. I mean, I think I know our listeners got a tremendous number of tips and insights and various strategies, and hopefully started to reflect upon themselves and the conversations they're having and how they're leading their teams. In a moment, I'm going to invite you to share how our listeners can reach out to you, what the best opportunity, where they can reach out to work with you. In closing, is there a message, any particular thought, inspiration, anything that comes to mind that you feel compelled to share? And I'm not sure exactly why I'm asking this question, but some part of my intuition is saying do it.
So this didn't come up earlier on, but it's at the heart of what I do when I teach leadership. And that is, ask yourself, who's the best boss you ever had? That's why I call my organization Best Boss. Best boss you ever had, and what did they do that was so special? And what you will almost always say, I've yet to find someone who said anything else, is one of two things. Some variation of cared about me as a person, got to know me as a unique individual, understood my strengths better than I understood myself, cared about me, listened to me, coached me, encouraged me, and so forth. All these relationship building activities. Or they will say something along the lines of pushed me out of my comfort zone, expected only my best, would give me work to redo if I didn't do my best, upheld the very high standards of excellence, gave me responsibility I wasn't sure I was ready for, all these requiring kinds of behaviors. And they'll say one of the two, and then you ask them about the one they didn't mention. If they say, oh, it was a great relationship, what about requiring? And they'll say, oh, yeah, that too. Or they'll talk about requiring first, and you say, well, what about the relationship? Oh, yeah, that too. Because the best boss you ever had is always the person who keeps you psychologically safe so that it's okay to make a mistake, and then pushes you to grow so that you're at the edge of making mistakes so that you can learn at your optimal rate and you perform at the best. You were in flow at work. And that combination of relating and requiring is the recipe to be a great boss. Now, there's a lot of behaviors behind that to make that happen. But where most people fail is they want to double down on the thing they feel best at. To the relators, the people who naturally build relationship, when things aren't going quite right, they want to relate more. And sometimes they despise requiring, or they just aren't comfortable with it, or I don't want to be a jerk. And the requirers, the ones who naturally are about challenging people, you ask about relating, they're like, well, I don't want to be touchy-feely. And I had this one guy, and that's all he wanted to do. It was like a country club around here. And they didn't like it. And they can recall how awesome it was to have a boss like that, but they can't see themselves as a boss like that. And so they only engage in half of the behaviors that are necessary. And what you have to do if you want to get the best out of people is give them what they need, even if it's not comfortable or easy for you to learn to give it.
Isn't that true in all of our relationships?
Well, sure. As a matter of fact, now that you
every
mention it.
interpersonal relationship, it's like, if we, just imagine if we were consistently fighting to meet the other person's need above ourselves, and if we were both doing that simultaneously, what would your relationships look
Well,
like?
there's a risk of codependency there.
There is. But I don't mean from a codependent standpoint.
Okay, but if
Go ahead.
assuming you're doing it from a place of groundedness and centeredness, it could be pretty
Yes.
terrific. And shouldn't we give it a try and find out.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you for spending your time with us on the Perpetual Growth Podcast. A big shout out to Thomas Cox for bringing so much value to today's conversation. Thomas, where can our listeners connect with you or learn more about what you're working on, what you have going on?
Go to bestboss.biz, B-I-Z. That's best, B-E-S-T-B-O-S-S .biz. And just hit me up there, talk to the chat bot, which routes over to me, fill out the contact me form, and I'll get back to you. Any of those. Or find me on LinkedIn.
Beautiful. Bestboss.biz or on LinkedIn. Of course, we'll have the links for the episode below. So if this episode sparks something for you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, subscribe, leave a review, and help us reach even more people on their growth journey. Now, remember, growth doesn't happen by chance. It happens by choice. We'll see y'all next time. Thomas, thanks again, my friend. It was an absolute pleasure having you today.
Thank you, Zach.